It's funny because when you and I talked before this show started, I think you mentioned how the Chiefs are -4 in takeaway. And
Yeah.
one of the things you also said you want to talk about with this show is winning the turnover battle. And that has been a key for the Chiefs the entire season is they need to try to find a way to win the turnover battle. This is the first week that they're going to be coming off a game where Mahomes didn't turn the ball over. They still lost the turnover battle because Kelsey had a fumble and they didn't get a takeaway. But this is the first week that Mahomes hasn't thrown an interception. It's crazy to think about that going into week 9. Sorry, I guess this is week 10, playing your ninth game, but that's where Kansas City has been. What have you seen from the Broncos so far this season?
Well, the Broncos have done a good job of creating havoc for the opposing quarterback and setting themselves up really well to cause turnovers. I mean, we saw it against Carolina. We saw it against the New Orleans Saints. I mean, we've seen it against quarterbacks that, they may not be the best quarterbacks in the league, obviously, but also against Baker Mayfield. They baited him into a really bad throw early in that game, and that helped them go up 14-0. So you see the Broncos with their pressure package and what they're able to do to kind of frazzle quarterbacks happened against Aaron Rodgers. They can get turnovers a variety of different ways. They can create turnovers, obviously, by getting that instant pressure, causing a rush throw, or they can, hit the quarterback and knock the ball out. So it's not like they're the Green Bay Packers averaging 2 or 3 turnovers a week right now at this point. But the Broncos, that is a strong suit of theirs, is getting to the quarterback, rushing his decision-making process, or popping that ball loose. They've been able to do that at times this season.
Yeah, and the question is going to be is can Kansas City on defense force Bo Nix into bad decisions? Bo Nix has 6 interceptions this season. Obviously, not near as many as Patrick Mahomes has had, but that's still quite a few interceptions this early into the season versus only 8 touchdowns. So that's going to be something to watch there as well. Can you keep that turnover or the TD to turnover ratio a little bit higher? I'm going to be very curious to see if they can force him because one of the things that we talked about in the last segment with the Chiefs defense is Spagnuolo sending pressure and you have no idea where it's going to be coming from. If he is able to force them to throw the ball earlier than he wants to, or force him to hold on to the ball for a split second longer than he wants to, the pass rush is starting to get home for Kansas City. That could play a big favor into the Chiefs defense being able to help get this win against the Broncos.
Yeah, it could. What they need to do to try to get him to make those poor throws is to make sure that he's not able to set his feet properly. That's where Bo has gotten himself into some trouble, is when he doesn't properly set his feet. He's done a good job of feeling out the pressure and making throws under pressure, but when he doesn't set his feet, the base obviously being off, it forces the throw to either be behind or too low or too high. Those are the 2 interceptions that he's thrown since the first 2 weeks of the season. He had 2 picks against the Seattle Seahawks. A couple of both of those were pretty bad. Then he had 2 picks against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But since that time, the interception that he threw against the Chargers, that was tipped up in the air by Marvin Mims. The interception that he just threw last week was completely the fault of Lil Jordan Humphrey, who should have caught the pass. So obviously the quarterback not always at fault for interceptions, as we know with Patrick Mahomes having, his receivers sometimes they let the ball hit them in the hands and obviously it pops up in the air. So that's the biggest thing there. The distinction of is he making bad throws at times? Absolutely. Is he putting the ball in harm's way consistently? That's a different discussion because Bo's not really putting the ball in harm's way very often, which is interesting. And I'll be fascinated to see how the Chiefs try to force him into doing just that, because that's been a strength of his dating back to his time at Oregon as well. So that, like you mentioned, the turnover battle, forcing these quarterbacks to make poor decisions. There's no Justin Simmons in Denver anymore. So who's going to pick off Patrick Mahomes this time? I don't know who will do it. He's been the guy the last handful of years.
I'm hoping nobody will be the answer that I'll be giving right now. But what I would say is the thing that you mentioned is if he can set his feet. The one thing that plays into Kansas City's advantage is they probably have the best defensive tackle in the NFL who's going to create havoc in the middle of the offensive line and is going to cause him to be moving around in the pocket more than just setting his feet, getting ready to throw. So Chris Jones, I think, is going to have a huge impact in this game because he always disrupts offenses and their timing. That is going to be a huge key. If he can continue to do that And you start to see situations where they bring in a brand new pass rusher in Joshua Uche this past week. Is he going to be a guy that can maybe start getting around the edge and putting pressure from the backside? That would be something that would really help out, especially with Karlaftis actually being limited in practice today. That could be huge for the Chiefs. When you look at this game, Kansas City heading in 8-0, Broncos are 5-4. How are you feeling about this game and how you think it's going to turn out?
I feel really good, honestly, about it, Chris. I know the Broncos are coming off a blowout loss to the Baltimore Ravens, but a loss like that can really help you refocus. And of course, it's entirely possible that the Broncos go to Kansas City and get blown out once again. They're one of the youngest teams in the league, got a rookie quarterback going up against the undefeated back-to-back Super Bowl champion. So nothing would surprise me, but this team has been playing really hard and they do a lot of things really well when they play at their best. We've seen the Broncos, they've been up there among the best in the league in terms of overall point differential. The game against the Ravens knocked that back down to earth, obviously,
Yep.
but when they've been playing well, they've played really well on both sides of the ball. And so I think anything is possible in this game. My biggest keys, like we mentioned, the turnover battle. Obviously, you always want to win the turnover battle in the NFL. Capitalizing when you cross midfield. We talked about that earlier, how the Broncos, they didn't capitalize when they got past midfield against the Ravens. You can't give away extra possessions to a team like the Chiefs, and you've got to score 7 when you have the opportunity as opposed to 3. And then no self-inflicted errors. I mean, you could point back to a comedy of errors that happened against the Baltimore Ravens, starting with the interception we just talked about. Little Jordan Humphrey pops the ball up in the air. You give Lamar Jackson a short field to work with, and the Broncos stopped him, but that's not the point. The point is that you gave him a short field to work with, and you can't do that against these teams. Let them steal possessions if you want to win a game like this. So the Broncos, can they go to Kansas City and get a win? It's going to be fun to see. I think they can. And I told you before the show, and for all of your listeners, Chris, I manifest a win for the Broncos no matter what. So realism, you could throw that out the window. FanDuel, you can throw the 8.5 points out the window. I've got the Broncos going in and getting a win in this game because I'd rather be right about predicting a win than right about predicting a loss. So I'll go with manifesting a win in this game, even though I do acknowledge that it's going to be very tough. Because the ball bounces the Chiefs' way. It just does. They have a built-in margin for error that is unlike anything that I've ever seen against whoever they play. It doesn't matter if it's the Super Bowl, if it's a week-to-week game. Kansas City Chiefs have the biggest built-in margin for error that I can ever recall for an NFL team, and that's just because they're just good in every way.
And I appreciate you saying that. The thing I would argue is I don't know that the ball has been bouncing Kansas City's way every time this year. I think that it has in certain instances. Obviously, there have been some times where it's bounced against Kansas City, but they've still found ways to overcome it. And that's really what we talked about last segment with the Chiefs offense is it may not look pretty, but they find a way to get things done. I mean, they're down there, number 1 running back. They're down their top 2 wide receivers, top 3 wide receivers the past couple of weeks until, obviously DeAndre Hopkins probably jumps up to being one of those guys now. But, Juju was a top 3 wide receiver for this team before they traded for Hopkins. He's probably still out this week. So you look at what they're able to do on offense. They've had to change everything that they planned on this season. They had a huge plan for Hollywood Brown. It hasn't panned out, obviously, because he hasn't played a snap for him this year other than the very first snap in the preseason. That's the only snap he's played for this team. And then you look at what happened to Rashee Rice. He's been out since week 4. That's something that they've had to overcome. Worthy is playing okay, but he's not playing. He's not obviously lighting the world on fire. But offensively, Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes, and as long as they give him the ability to sit back in the pocket and at least look around at the field for 2 or 3 seconds, Kansas City is always going to have a pretty good chance to win. The one thing I will say is you made a great point. When you're in a situation where you get across midfield, they've got to put it in the end zone. And I say that specifically because one of the things that really I could not believe, and one of our, actually James from Locked On Bucks actually said this after the game. He called his coach a coward for not going for 2 to try to win before they went to overtime. And my whole point with that is that you have to have the mindset of if you're going to beat this Chiefs team, you have to be aggressive. I'm not saying you have to be overly aggressive, but in that situation, you have 30 seconds left in the game. That's a situation where you say, okay, we just went and scored a touchdown. Is it more or less a good idea to go for a 2 and try to keep the ball out of Mahomes' hands to win the game? Like, that's really what it comes down to. You said it yourself. He finds a way to get things done, and that's what he's been doing, and they continue to win. I think Kansas City finds a way to win this game. I'm going to be curious to see if it's close. The game against the Bucs was supposed to be a 9.5-point game. I believe it ended up being 6 in overtime. I think that the weather should be better this week, but Kansas City has been able to run the ball. That's been something that has made their offense a lot more effective. What I want to see is I want to see Kansas City's defense play better this week. I think they get the win. I think they move to 9-0. And then we're going to be talking about the Chiefs and the Bills, which is going to be the game of the week after this.
I can't wait for that game. I always love watching the Chiefs go up against the other powerhouses in the AFC. Going to be interesting to see because the big storyline for the Broncos as of that last game against the Ravens was, can you hang in big games like this against good teams? Like, all right, you're 5-3. Like, we had the same record as the Ravens going into that game. That's cool and that's cute and all, but can you actually play with these teams? That's something that they're still working at proving that they can do. And so this is a great test for them. Win or lose, blowout, close game, it doesn't matter. We hope the Broncos can keep it close, obviously closer than that Ravens game. I know you guys over there, you don't necessarily care about it being a close game, but for the Broncos side of things, like, can you prove that you belong in big games like this? Because you showed against the Ravens, a lot of people, hey, we don't belong in this game. That's got to change against this Kansas City team.
I disagree with you. I do care. I don't want it to be close. And it's not
I know you don't.
It's not that I don't like the Broncos. It's just I'm very tired of watching the Chiefs play close game after close game after close game after close game. I want to not have my heart rate be, and my stress level be at level 9 just
You guys
watching
play the
game.
Raiders soon. You can do it against the Raiders. Take your blowout win against the Raiders. We'll see about this one here.
Even against the Raiders, it wasn't. I mean, it was a blowout for the most part. They scored points at the very end. I'm not saying it has to be a blowout, but I would like to see a 2-score game going into the fourth quarter. I'd feel a lot better about that. But it's a big question because this Broncos defense is fantastic. But I will say this. If you go back and watch how the season started, Mahomes wasn't on the same page with his offense and wasn't on the same page with his wide receivers. He has looked markedly better the past couple of weeks, especially against the Raiders 2 weeks ago and against this Bucs team that they just played. If he continues that trend, this is going to be another big game for him. And I think that we're going to see a fun Chiefs offense.